Hey guys, it's Drac, and today I'm doing the Proton mod guide. Most notably, these Vortex blasters are really hard to get a performance mod out of, but I have figured out that I can remove the safety locks from most of them. I want to be able to deprime the Proton like this, so I'm going to have to remove wherever its trigger lock is. And the reason I want to do that is I want to be able to load a dart or disc and then deprime it, as opposed to the alternative, which is right now, if you want to have it unprimed with a disc in it, you have to hold down the jam release and slide the disc in, and then you can fire that way. So I'm going to start taking it apart to remove all the safeties. They're all on this side, and then there's two more screws in the front. They look like they're all Phillips head. Alright, so the first thing you want to do when removing the Proton's side panel is you've got to remove the front piece, and it has two Phillips head screws holding it into place. That slides off the front, and then the blaster comes apart with two halves. Take your time when removing these two halves because there's internals on both sides. That's new. Up here we've got the orange piece, which has a lot of running rails, and then the jam release is almost entirely on this side, and that you pull these pieces back here and it pulls back the jam release. Those are typically activated by this mechanism here, which pops out that kind of gear thing. Now, the internals for the trigger are just remarkably complicated. That front piece has another torsion spring in it. When you pull back the sled, you can see that it starts to prime the blaster, and then there's a spring over here that pulls the sled back when you release it with either side's flip switch. The trigger is locked almost all the time. It looks like this is a lock, and then when you start priming the blaster, this comes down and it's a lock. So both of those are going to have to go. It looks like there are many more screws that hold in the trigger mechanism and the sled, so I'm going to start removing it layer by layer and see if I can get at those locks. Alright, so I took out two of the black Phillips head screws that held in the torsion spring launch sled mechanism, and I learned something really interesting. This is a compression spring attached to a giant rubber piece, and this rubber piece here is designed to absorb all the force from this torsion spring when it hits it. I'm assuming that's why this otherwise flimsy piece of almost transparent plastic doesn't break, and that's very clever that they've started padding these mechanisms, because I don't think that they'd last very long without it, but with it they can take tons of shots. I actually discovered how to do a performance mod for the Nerf Proton. I relocated the torsion spring so that it now has more compressible space and delivers more power. And let me just tell you, this was a real pain. I had to remove this to get more space to move around. I removed this pin from in here so I could move the actual lever itself. I removed both these screws. I unscrewed where the torsion spring used to lay, which was in here. I took my needle nose pliers, pulled it all the way back, and then replaced the screw hole here. And it looks like Nerf might have designed this originally to locate here, but they decided against it, probably and hopefully because it delivers too much power. So now I'm going to start epoxying over this entire thing just to make sure that it's really solid, and then I'll come back in and replace my padding, lock this back down in with its pin, and I'll replace it into the blaster once I remove the locks. You guys can see here that I finished the torsion spring. I've laid a ton of epoxy in there to cover it, put back in that padding, re-stretched it back and reset it so that's ready to go back in the blaster. I found this safety feature, which was part of this top orange piece, and I removed that. When I butterflied open the trigger assembly, I wound up with these three pieces falling out. I'm assuming they're locks for the trigger and the sled, so I removed all of them and their springs. Now I'm going to start putting things back into the blaster and show you what it looks like when it's done. Upon closer inspection, I found out that these two safeties are not in fact safety mechanisms. This is both a safety mechanism in that it's a trigger lock, but it also holds open the tray. Since I want to be able to shoot with the tray open, I don't know why I wouldn't, I carved down the trigger where the lock meets, and then this one, I believe, is part of the catch mechanism, and I cut it down so that it can't impede the trigger pull. So now the trigger moves freely regardless of whether these are down or up. And I'm hoping that this will function now, because when I put it back together last time it didn't. Alright guys, I'm hoping this is the final lock. This orange piece here fit in with one silver flat Phillips head screw right there, and it was a trigger lock, but now that I've removed it, I'm hoping that I can finally get this thing to work with its new torsion spring mod. These are all the pieces that I ended up removing from the Proton. There's a ton of locks in this. The others I either cut down, or in one case I cut down the trigger, but now the trigger moves freely at all times, which is important, because one thing that I hated about the Proton was there was no way to deprime it. Well, now I can deprime it whenever I want, I can pull the trigger whenever I want, and with that torsion spring mod, I now get ridiculous ranges. It used to get about 65, 70 feet flat. Now I punch 85. These discs just catch the air. With an angled shot, I can hit 100 feet with this Proton now. The discs also move a little bit faster. There's more force behind them. And I feel like this is what it took to get this to compete with the darts inside as far as speed goes. The discs now move faster than darts. This Proton with my clip mod is now definitely nicer than the Vigilon, because I could relocate that torsion spring for more power. I couldn't be more pleased with what I've done with this Proton. I may integrate LEDs up here in the future, but other than that, I think I'm finished with it. It performs beautifully. I could, if I wanted to, dry fire it. I don't know why I'd ever want to do that, but it's been de-locked. It's got more power, it hits amazing ranges, the discs move fast now. This can compete with a Nightfinder, and that was the goal. Thanks for watching.